Hello, thank you so much for joining us. This is very exciting. This is 5y5 Live, and it's a special episode in partnership this week with our friends at ScoutedFootball, whose handbook number 9, or 1X in Roman numerals, came out last week. And I've seen a tweet from the big boss, Stephen Ganavas, who said it has been the biggest ever launch week in Scouted history, getting better each edition. And we're so chuffed to be joined by two Scouted writers to talk us through the edition of the Scouted handbook and to talk through some of the players that they profiled, but also to talk more generally about Scouted football. So joining George Ellick, who you can see there, and myself, Ali Maxwell, is Joe Donoghue of Scouted, but also a writer for Leeds Live. Thanks for joining us, Joe.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on. It's it's a pleasure to get chatting again. A nice little opportunity to catch up and talking about my favourite subject of Scouted, of course. But it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, David Cartledge is on as well, and I know for you, David, along with your work for ESPN, working for Scouted, writing profiles of players, and what you did in this latest handbook is one of your favourite bits of work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I first got into writing, I started writing about young players. So to still be doing that right now is fantastic, really.
Well, we've got so much to get our teeth into. I hope that there are people joining as we record. If you're listening later on the podcast or watching the video later on YouTube, we're going to make it seem as if this isn't a live stream. But of course, we will be reacting to questions and comments coming in as well. So if you are watching live, please do get involved in the comments. Send in any questions you've got about Scouted, about 5 yards as well, of course. George and I, ambassadors for 5 yards, and we'll take some at the end once we've grilled these two. But George, I mean, we've been fans of Scouted for a long time, of course, and their growth, their development's been something of an inspiration, I think, for us and for a lot of other people who are interested in similar things to us. But specifically, ever since we've been part of the 5 yards team, we've really felt that Scouted's area of expertise very closely aligns with our own.
Yeah, definitely. Good evening, everybody. It's interesting because we launched Not the Top 20 at a similar time to Scouted. And so we kind of saw both content streams growing side by side for a while before Scouted suddenly went up to about 40,000 followers when we had about 4,000. But it has been amazing to see. And, you know, everybody loves young players. Everybody loves spotting the next big talent. Everybody loves being able to show off that they were the person who said back in however long ago that this player was going to be the next big thing. And Scouted, you know, with all the handbooks down the years, have certainly got a few good ones there, maybe a few poor ones as well, but I'm not going to point any fingers. But even when you look back to when we were kind of at the beginning of 5 yards launching, Ali, it was you and I, Guy, the founder, a couple of other founders there as well, in an office in Farringdon, talking about which content streams, which kind of football content sites do we want to be closely aligned with. And ScoutedFootball was pretty much the first one that you and I said. So I guess us having this live stream, us being able to speak to Joe and David, who've been on the show before, is great for us because it shows that we are kind of working with the people that we want to work with. And you look at in the handbook itself, which is always consistently excellent. You look at the player profiles and they're so aligned with what 5 yards is all about. You know, 5 yards, you want to identify talent at an early age. You want to be able to say what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are, where they need to improve, scout players effectively, invest in their future, and crucially look at where they're going to be going further on in their careers. And if you look at the handbook itself and the reports in there, you've got style of play and forecast of the future for every single player, which is exactly what we want to look at here. So it makes sense to work with these guys. Glad they're happy to come on the show with us and looking forward to chatting through some of their favourite players.
We're going to start picking their brains right away. Before we get into it, just to mention that this has been a partnership week between 5 yards and ScoutedFootball, and a big part of it has been we've got a handbook to give away. The latest handbook, the one that is flying off the shelves, the digital shelves, I suppose, is probably more accurate. We're running a competition on the 5 yards Twitter account. All you have to do is write a 10-word scouting report of any player in the world, past or present. The best ones, maybe the funniest ones, maybe a mixture of comedy and detail, will be the judges of that, will win a free Scouted handbook. So whether you've got one yourself and you'd like to give it as a gift to someone who'd like it, or whether you just want to get your hands on it, that is a way of doing so. But it's time for some meat on these bones. Joe, just a bit about the handbook itself and putting it together. I mean, this is the 9th. 25 magnificent player profiles in there, of course. All of those players are on 5 Yards as well, ready for anyone listening, anyone using 5 Yards to go and scout and to add to their squad if they like. But this time around, you guys branched out a bit. You added an extra layer of Scouted with some feature pieces. Can you tell me how that came about, why you decided to take on these feature pieces this time around?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've always wanted to sort of branch out and try and diversify the handbook as much as possible, because while the bread and butter essentially has been the 25 profiles over the past 2 years and the first 8 volumes that we did, it was always sort of long form storytelling was sort of how everyone involved in Scouted has sort of got involved with it to begin with. So being able to produce something like that. With unique stories, obviously with the help of David, of course, with his La Real feature piece, and other things such as like interviews and just sort of telling the more niche stories about under 23 football. It just felt the right time to do it. The start of a new year, the start of a new handbook cycle in 2021, and it was kind of pretty much across the board a consensus that this is the sort of thing that we want to be doing. We want to be offering more to people, to subscribers, to anybody who has sort of engaged with our account, with our product over the past 2 and a bit years, and even further back. So it was all sort of about giving as much as we can give back to everybody who's supported us so massively over the past few years, and it's an extension of a thank you, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've got some magnificent writers to do so. One of them on the stream with us, David. I'm holding up the fruits of your labor. An article, as Joe said, on the Real Sociedad Academy. In the Basque region, it's interesting because when you talk about young players and academies, there's so much focus on the philosophy of Athletic Club, of course, based out of Bilbao, but not far away in San Sebastian. You found an academy, Zubieta, I think it's called, to write about. Why did you focus on them, and what can you tell us about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's always interested me about the other youth academies outside the very obvious La Masia in Barcelona is just if you look at the players that they've produced and the legacy that they have. I think for Zubieta to produce Xabi Alonso, for instance, who will arguably go down as one of the finest midfielders around. I think he's won it all as well, and they produced him. And not only have they produced top level players, but they've produced squad players as well. They've produced potential talents. They've also produced players that have stayed with them, one club men. Played well into their 30s. Look at somebody as well like Xabi Prieto, who recently retired. Such a classy style of footballer that they have always produced. And I think I found interesting that this conveyor belt is just never ending. And they always seem to have, you name a squad at the start of the season, you put down on paper 21, 23 names. Real Sociedad and Athletic Bilbao as well, they're putting 17, 18 names there that they have produced themselves, or they are from that region. And I think if you look at football now and globalization of the game, for them to still be able to do that, for them to retain that heritage, those values, the philosophy is phenomenal, I think, and becomes all the more impressive as football develops.
And one of them playing for the first team at the moment in Oyarzabal, who's been an interesting player to follow on 5 Yards since we launched in the last few months. I think around the time of launch, he was on magnificent form and his price rose quite sharply. Real Sociedad doing very well in the league. But he's an interesting case, isn't he? Because a normal club, Oyarzabal might have moved on by now, but he's still there, age 23. He's played more games, age 23, than I dare say most players his age in Spanish football. How good is this player, and how likely is it that we will see him turn out for a very, very top club? Is there something different about La Real where Oyarzabal might be happy to stay there for the rest of his career?
I think he might. There's just a wonderful bubble there in the Basque Country that you have as a player, and Athletic are another instance as well with Ike Muñain. He could have left many years ago, and others as well, but they didn't. Look at Inigo Martinez as well. He swapped Real Sociedad for Athletic Bilbao. They are happy to stay in the Basque Country. It's such a great way of life. Their friends, their family around there. You're playing football constantly at a very, very good level. You're always in the top 8, top 6 of La Liga. European football is always on offer as well. So Oyarzabal, I think he looks upon it and he says, is the grass really greener? Do I want to go to a Manchester United or a Real Madrid potentially not getting the team, potentially not get the coaching that I will go up a level. I think he knows at Real Sociedad he can be a leader, despite he's still very young himself. He can be a leader, and he can progress there, I think, and help bring on the next generations of talent that are coming through. I think there's a really nice value in that as well. Even if you're 23, 24, there's going to be players coming through with 17, 18. You can help nurture and help them become the next stars. And you see that now. There's another generation coming through with somebody like Baranchenya, who's just another wonderfully talented player. And I reckon we are going to be talking a lot about him in the next 2 to 3 years. So Oyarzabal will look upon it and say, oh, I can guide him. I can be the leader here.
I genuinely can't talk or think about Real Sociedad without bringing up the fact that San Sebastian is one of the great towns in Europe to visit for a long weekend. And I dare say there'll be people watching this stream, listening to the podcast, who might be planning a bit of a blowout European football weekend when we can. And George, I'm looking at you and I'm saying, can we use some of that company card stuff to take us to San Sebastian for the weekend? I'd be quite up for that.
I think the answer is very much yes. So long as the restaurants are open and the golf courses are open, then we will be there in a flash. Brilliant city, and I would love to go back there. I didn't get to go and see Sociedad when I went, so sounds like a plan to me.
Okay, one more question on La Real, but it's not to do with an academy prospect. But David, we have to ask you about Alexander Isak, who plays up front for Real Sociedad, who is just so hot right now. Some unbelievable form in the last few weeks. One of the highest performance pay earners over the last month on 5 yards, and still so young, despite the fact that I feel like I recognize the name pretty well over the last few years. Give me a bit of a scouting report on this player. What is he like as a striker? How good are we talking?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting the way his career has gone. Obviously, when he first came through, and many people will feel, oh my God, he feels like he's been around about 10 years because he came through so young. He was touted as the next Zlatan Ibrahimovic. I think the fact that he's a tall Swede is probably where the comparisons end. I think the style that they have is very, very different. And I think this year is very interesting for Isak because, he's a centre forward. He's very, very tall in appearance, but he's very, very quick, very intelligent, excellent feet. I've noticed as well this season his ability to drop off the front line, to play with his back to goal, to link with midfield. Without Martin Odegaard there, there's that need for a little link man midfield. And he's been very, very happy to sacrifice himself off the front line, come into midfield, link with David Silva, Adnan Januzaj as well. And I really like that humility about his game and that, that maturing I'm already seeing. He's still very, very young. And, you're already seeing people tout him as, if we don't get Haaland this summer, then maybe we go for Isak. And you see that as well. And he's definitely got about him because he's that big presence up front. He is a target man, absolutely. But he's very mobile as well. He's got more to his game. He's a very well-rounded player.
George, I'm interested in Isak because, of course, he's already moved around quite a bit. He's, this isn't the first club he's played for. He's not necessarily breaking through at Sociedad, but as David says, he's a man mentioned, just in that tier below Haaland at the moment, and Haaland is pretty unattainable for the majority of clubs. He's £52 million on 5 yards. And obviously, the value on 5 yards represents the future performance pay of a player. So this is someone that the 5 yard scouts thinks is going to be scoring goals at a high level for a pretty long time, albeit he's not one of the most expensive players on site.
Yeah, it's interesting because David speaks about how, Oyarzabal might spend the majority of his career at Sociedad. I guess for the same reasons, we don't know whether Isak will or will not, but certainly you'd expect Sociedad to be able to keep hold of their talent maybe better than some other clubs of their level, just below that top tier in Europe. So the price suggests that Isak will have to move because, as we know, with 5 yards, you need to be scoring goals regularly and getting assists regularly and winning games regularly at the top level. And for me, a player who is valued 52 million is going to have to do that, probably not at a Sociedad. If he is going to do it at Sociedad, he's going to have to score a lot of goals, you'd have thought, because he's not going to get that sweet, sweet Champions League PP that we're all after. Looking at kind of comparing him to other players of that age, you mentioned Haaland, but I think that's probably quite unfair because even, we probably do expect Haaland to move in the summer, if not maybe next summer, but to that other club. But he's already playing at a club that's playing consistently in the Champions League and is certainly one of the top 3 sides in their domestic league as well. So he's already able to get that elite level PP. An interesting one who I think you can compare him to is Donyell Malen. at PSV, not in terms of their style in any way, shape or form, but in terms of their age and kind of where we can anticipate their careers to go. And Marlon's valued at 29 million. So you've got Isak, who is already valued at nearly double that price, which might seem quite toppy. But looking at the scout report that we've got from people who know a lot more than me, La Liga Lowdown did a scout report who were on 5x5 a couple of weeks ago. And it's quite funny hearing David saying that the comparisons to Zlatan are a bit misplaced because they compare him to Peter Crouch rather than Zlatan, which maybe might be doing a bit of a harsh deal, but certainly showing that it's not all about necessarily his power that comes alongside his big frame. They put him down at 6'2", but I think he's actually 6'4". But maybe the fact that he's already had that part of his career where he's already had that move early on. You know, we've seen in the past players who've made a big move early in their career and it hasn't quite gone to plan, seem to be a little bit happier to stay put, maybe seem to just be happier playing games and being happy. So I don't know what you guys think, but personally I think Isak would have to get a move fairly soon to justify that price tag, and maybe that isn't on the horizon in the immediate future.
I could actually see it happening this summer. It's quite interesting, and that's why I brought up the Haaland example, because I think if clubs are going to go in for a centre forward, they're going to go, right, we can't afford Haaland, so you're kind of going to look after your B list in terms of price, in terms of the clubs that could be chasing him. So you can see maybe say Real Madrid won the race for Haaland, Manchester City might say, okay, let's just have a look at Isak. Does he offer the things that, Haaland could as well, for maybe 50 less million or so? And I think other clubs will do that as well, because he's a very, very capable striker. I think sometimes he tends to overdo it on the ball. So there's just a few little things that I think the next club, if he does move, can shape with him and make him into a better player. But I think the potential is most certainly there. That it wouldn't be ludicrous to say next 3 to 5 years he could be one of the top 5-10 centre forwards in the world.
Yeah, really interesting player, both in real life and 5 yards terms. We had Felix there from Looks Good on Paper saying that their model, which is really impressive, has him similar-ish to the likes of Icardi and to Falcao. And I think, if he could get anywhere near their level and extend that over a decent period of time, age just 21, then we could be looking at someone with a very exciting future. David, reading that piece on La Real was magnificent. We'll definitely get you along for our long weekend there when we can. Thank you so much for joining us and talking us through your part of the Scouted Handbook number 9.
Thanks a lot, guys. I look forward to some pinchos in San Sebastian together.
Oh, yes, please. Yes, please. That lightly carbonated wine they have, Chacoli. Unbelievable stuff. Absolutely brilliant. We're going to say goodbye to David there, and spotlight turns to Joe Donoghue, who works very, very hard on all things Scouted. Joe, you wrote 2 profiles for the handbook and an interview as well with young Rabbi Matondo, currently on loan at Stoke. But let's focus on those that you profiled. First is Brazilian winger playing for Ajax called Anthony. I can imagine as video scouting sessions go, that one was pretty good fun.
Yeah, it was. I mean, as soon as Anthony signed for Ajax, he was one that I really wanted to write about. And the thing with us at Scouted is, you're going to have to lay your claim quite early if you want to claim a player to write about in the handbooks, because there's a player who's got such a high ceiling as Anthony. He's going to have plenty of very, very well established writers who are going to want to cover him, and even more so than myself. There have been, I think, with Volume 9, we've welcomed the additions of so many talented writers. So yeah, I very much had to stake a claim very early there. But as you're saying, in terms of live scouting, it's remarkable how routine, just a very complex move, he's turned into just his general play for Ajax. He gets the ball on sort of in the right-hand half space on the right-hand side of the pitch, just outside the opposition's penalty area. And then he just bends in a left-footed cross. And to begin with, it looks as though he's overhit them. But more often than not, he's been aiming to the back post for Lassina Traore, Klaas-Jan Huntelaar, and now Seb Haller. You couldn't really ask for 3 better players to be trying to pick a pass onto the head of. But from that right-hand side, he's absolutely excellent. And one of the things that I always sort of like to cover in my profiles is try to get as much of a grasp of the personality of a player as possible. So in terms of digging into the background, I found out that through an article by Eric Gomez on The Guardian that his upbringing hadn't exactly been as pampered as you might see with English players of a similar style who've been nurtured through an academy. But he was coming up through Sao Paulo's academy setup, but sort of going through some very much a favela type upbringing, borrowing football boots from the shoe shop that his mother worked at to train in, and witnessing police raids, rubbing shoulders with some less than desirable people. And it's one of those where it really intrigues me to see how far they've come. And I think a lot of the time with South American players, there may be the stereotype that they need to mature in their decision making when they come to Europe. But with Anthony, I think that has happened in a snap. He's, in terms of his shot locations, they've improved. But in terms of just his decision making, if he's not confident going down the right on his right foot because he's left-footed, then he'll cut back. He'll start again. He'll retain the ball to keep the possession moving, instead of perhaps giving it away or running down blind alleys. So yeah, in terms of live scouting, just a fantastic dribbler, great shooter, really, really entertaining, has that low center of gravity, and yeah, an absolute pleasure to watch.
I mean, it's great hearing. I mean, we did a show the other day, and I think, Joe, the way that you speak about players and do kind of verbal scout reports is incredibly impressive. And anybody listening to what Joe says there, I mean, A, would love the handbook, and I think B, would love going on 5 yards and seeing all the scout reports. And it's interesting because you've got a player here whose route towards kind of towards the elite, because he's not there yet. The Eredivisie, a non-PP league as well at the moment, so you're not getting anything for these goals as it stands. But you're seeing he goes from Sao Paulo to Ajax. You've got two leagues, I guess, where the quality of those leagues is always up for debate. I mean, even now, the Eredivisie, you sometimes see talent tracking and you sometimes see it not tracking. And when you write a scout report on 5 yards, you are asked to give a player a rating, both now and a potential rating as well, out of 100. 95 or above is world class, 85 or above is Champions League, 75 or above is Premier League. Joe, I'm going to ask you, put you on the spot here. Whereabouts would you have Anthony now, and whereabouts do you reckon he could get to?
I'd probably say around 78-ish now, because there are still a few nicks to his game. But I definitely think that, long term, he's definitely got the potential to be a Champions League player just because of how quickly he's adapted. I think he's got 8 goals and 8 assists in the Eredivisie in 1,400 minutes this season, which is, to come into, first of all, Ajax do not spend huge sums of money on players that they don't have a sure opinion on, because they know that they can produce one who will probably be 80-90% just as good from their own academy, who will cost nothing. So to replace Hakim Ziyech with Anthony and spend the 15 million or however much it was on a player straight out of Brazil, they were backing him to be very good, and I think he surprised most people in just how well he's adapted. So I think that just from his style, it's very explosive, that low center of gravity, very much like a fledgling Eden Hazard in a way, where he doesn't quite yet have the ability to weave through multiple players, but that explosiveness where you'll slow it down to a standing start, with a one-on-one with the defender, and he knows that he has the ability to go past him, and as that defender turns to face, he's already gone. So I think in terms of long-term potential, I think he's definitely long-term potential Champions League quality, because of how many options Brazil have in that area, sort of on that right wing. I don't know whether you'd be putting him into international quality yet. There'll be a lot of things that Tite has to sort of decide between, whether he wants a hard worker like Richarlison, or he wants a more creative player, so to speak, in Anthony. But Champions League is definitely where I'm hanging my hat on.
Yeah, it's not a million miles off from what Matthew Stevenson, who's the only person who's written a scout report on Anthony on 5 yards as of yet, says. He goes 89 for potential, which is a pretty impressive ceiling. And from what you've said, it's hard to disagree. I wonder if there's anyone watching who knows a bit about Anthony, who can chip in with any thoughts. If you're listening back on the podcast, please do tweet us as well. We're always keen to hear your thoughts about players. But most importantly, you can set up a scouting profile on 5 yards and you can put them down in writing, put your opinions down. They're time stamped. You can go back to them in 6, 12, 18 months time, and you can prove that you knew just what was going to happen next for, well, around 700 players that are currently on 5 yards. I think it's a really interesting thing that you sort of said about how Ajax recruitment you can be quite confident in, because, as you say, they know that they have talented academy players who, you know, a lot of them can contribute perfectly well at Eredivisie level. So when you see them sign a player like Anthony, as you say, you can be pretty confident that it's not going to be a busted flush. And, you know, that's quite an interesting one in 5 yards terms, because, you know, if I'm looking for players to add to my squad, it's definitely one way of going about things, thinking of the teams who in real life, their recruitment teams you can trust. I think of a team like Brentford, who obviously gets so much credit for their recruitment process. But in 5 yards terms, if you buy a Brentford player, you can also be quite confident that they will be sold on at some point. And teams are so happy to buy from Brentford because they know the quality that they're getting. I dare say at the very top level, Ajax are certainly a team like that, who the very elite teams can sign players from. And they know that they're going to get someone whose football education, while they've been at Ajax, would have been right up there. So that was a really interesting part of your answer there. We're going to ask you about the next player that you've profiled, Adam Armstrong. Now, Armstrong plays in the EFL, in the Championship, so George and I cover him pretty closely. The first thing I think of when I think of Armstrong is just how relentless he is as an attacking threat. And he's played so much football, despite being, I think he's maybe just turned 24 now, so just came in under your under-23 threshold for this handbook. I mean, he's played so much football that, again, as a video scouting missions go, you could have spent hours just watching Armstrong goals.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Armstrong is that availability factor. You know, a lot of the time you look at the players who score 30 goals in a season and you think, well, you know, that's very impressive. But I think the one thing that often goes under the radar is that, you know, you have to play a certain amount of minutes to get to those figures. And, you know, the amount of goals that Adam Armstrong has scored at, you know, Championship level over the past 18, 24 months, you know, it's because he's been pretty much never injured. And that's been a constant throughout his entire career. You know, he's played over 20,000 minutes. And as you say, he's just turned 24. That's ridiculous. I think I say in the profile that, you know, in terms of an age mate, James Maddison is a year older. And he has played, I think it's around 5,000 minutes fewer, but he's been a regular at Norwich, Leicester, Aberdeen, Coventry. You know, he's been a regular everywhere he's been. So that just kind of exemplifies just how available Armstrong has been constantly. Yeah. But when I was writing this one, you know, I'll hold my hands up. I was thinking about you guys. I was. But, you know, I was thinking, well, Adam Armstrong is someone who I watched at the beginning of his career quite intently, you know, sort of when he was 16, 17, 18, 19, because he was at Newcastle. And then sort of took an interest when he was out on loan at Coventry, where he's got 20 goals in 40 games in League One. And then sort of as he left and went permanently to Blackburn, I kind of tailed off a little bit and then started to pick up my interest again when, you know, obviously when he started scoring again. But, you know, he's someone who has always been fantastic at those zigzagging runs against the high lines, you know, and that's something that I'm sure that you guys have seen countless times. But it's that, you know, if you're going to play a high line against Blackburn, then be prepared to be picked off in behind, you know, especially when you've got a Harvey Elliott type player in behind to be able to thread those balls through. And yeah, I'm really, really pleased to see how well Adam Armstrong's doing, because, you know, he's had a time of it. You know, but those Barnsley and Bolton loans were not easy. And it's, I think you'll know it's very easily to get lost by the wayside sometimes, and teams will just think, well, he had a good loan to begin with and then maybe just dropped off a bit and that's it, the chance is gone. But he's gone back into League One with Blackburn, got promoted with them, and went, you know what, I'm gonna give this a real go. And as a result, he'll probably end up getting a Premier League move out of it.
Yeah, I think he will get a Premier League move. I think Blackburn's recent poor form is probably the best thing in a sense for Adam Armstrong's career, because they're going to really struggle to hold on to him if they end up pretty far outside the playoffs, which it looks like they will at the moment. And he's an interesting one for me, because I couldn't agree more with what you're both saying in terms of, you know, he's a guy who's played an incredible amount of football for the player that he is. But I think we've seen a development to his game this season, which has kind of not surprised us. Ali, you mentioned it very early on one of our Sky segments, where he's always been a bit of a shot monster, and that hasn't changed at all. You look at the Championship this season, he tops the shots per 90 at 4.7. Second is Josh Corona with 3.3. So he's having 1.4 shots per game more than anybody else in the league. And I'd like to say they're all good shots. I'd like to say they're all from good locations, but they're not. You know, he is somebody who, he's quite good at it, to be fair. He's got a very good strike from range, but he is somebody who takes on shots too often. And I do feel like he is a player who could improve a lot under the right tutelage. He's somebody who still needs to finesse his game a little bit and work out how he can be more effective in the final third without necessarily shooting. He's up on 5 yards, as you guys can see, at 15 million, which for a guy whose job, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche on 5x5, but I always say he is on the pitch to score goals and to make goals. And therefore, you're getting a guy who, so long as he's playing football, is going to do that. My only concern is he going to be the next in line to get that big move up, but not necessarily get the game time that he needs in order to prove himself? You know, he's now, and has been for the last couple of years, a confirmed starter wherever he's playing. I do worry that could he have a bit of a Dwight Gale syndrome? Could he be somebody who goes into a club who are probably going to be warding off relegation, who don't necessarily have the time and the patience to persevere with someone having their first regular run of games at that level? That would be my only issue. If he gets the right move, and if the faith is kept with him, I have no doubt that he could be a bit of a snip at 15 mil though.
What I'm interested in, and certainly interested to hear your thoughts, and this is a little bit devil's advocate, but what I love about your handbook and your profiles is that you're not just cheerleaders for players. Like, these are clearly players that you get attached to. I'm sure when you write a profile, in the same way that George and I get attached to the very best EFL talent because we love watching them and we want them to do well. But you're very clear in the profiles of what a player's weaknesses are and how much that could hold him back. By no means do you say about every player profiled, he's going right to the top and will be thriving in the Champions League forever and ever. So I think you guys, that's one thing that you do really, really well. And it's hard to ignore that Armstrong is shorter than a lot of strikers who play and thrive in the Premier League as a number 9 in the modern game, where the majority of teams do not play with 2 up top. You know, won't give someone necessarily a physical foil, but want them to do everything. So I guess one of my questions is to Joe, do you see that hindering him in a big way? We always talk about how important it is to pick the right team when you move from the Championship to the Premier League. And I guess that's just got to be the case here. You know, Brighton's Neil Mopai is not the biggest, and he's their main striker. And boy, does he get a lot of chances created for him. So, you know, I could see, and I know that Ollie O'Connell, who wrote a scout report on Armstrong, on 5 yards, he said perfect place for him, Brighton and Hove Albion. That next move is crucial, isn't it? Because as George said, you don't want him to get stuck.
Yeah, I think, you know, choosing this move will be sort of the biggest one he makes, because it will be the defining one of, is he a Premier League player, or is he going to be stuck in perpetual Cameron Jerome territory or Dwight Gale territory, as George was saying? You know, I think the Gale comparison, I can see exactly where you're coming from. I think with him, he's maybe more of a sniffer of goals, whereas Armstrong, I think, has a bit more to his finishing repertoire. So that maybe, you know, I quite like how Armstrong, when he can bend off into the channel on the left-hand side, whereas, you know, with Dwight Gale, you're always going to have him as a focal point, which leads me to believe that, you know, Armstrong will probably be quite good in a fluid front line. And obviously you don't always get that with teams who are nearer the bottom of the Premier League, who typically are the teams who are signing strikers from the Championship. So it's important that he gets this move right. I think I'd be inclined to say that the best move for Armstrong would be to a mid-table Premier League team. I wouldn't sort of say that, you know, as you were saying, Ali, you know, the uptick in shot taking is what has been behind his goal scoring streak. So you remove those shots, and by default you remove the goals. And I think that's, you know, 4.7 shots per 90. That's a ridiculous amount. Obviously not all from great locations, but he's clearly getting in positions where he can pop them off. if he's going to be in a team which, you know, is going to have few opportunities, maybe isn't as efficient at counter-attacking as Blackburn can be against the high line, or, you know, is asking a lot more of him in terms of, you know, withdrawing and playing a little bit deeper, you know, relying on him for link-up. You know, essentially he's going to be coming up against centre-halves who have got the physicality of an Aidan Flint every week, and mixed with the agility that they can actually keep pace with him. So it'll be an interesting one to traverse. But I've made no what's the word? I've made no
secret.
Yes, that's the one. It was such a secret, I'd forgotten the word. I've made no secret that I think Leicester would be a good move for him. Now, I am conscious that they may be levelling up too fast. When I came on this, they were actually 1-0 down to Burnley, so that might be a good thing. But it's now 1-1, brilliant. But I think Leicester might be a good move for him. I just think the handover between him and Jamie Vardy might be a year too soon. But I don't think maybe, you know, bringing him in a year early to sort of bed in, because I don't see Kelechi Iheanacho being a complete, you know, a completely perfect replacement for Leicester. And, you know, Vardy gets injured, and, you know, who do you put in? I think Armstrong stylistically would match up quite well, because, you know, Jamie Vardy's small in stature. He doesn't win physical duels, but you put him one-on-one, you know, in half the pitch, give him that space to run, and he's going to go through, and he's got the composure to finish. I think Armstrong's got the same about him.
I guess one of the big questions is, and there's no definitive answer, and that's kind of the beauty of scouting and 5 yards, its very essence, is if one of the most amazing things about him is the amount of minutes that he's played at this point, how much can you flip that into a concern going forward, either in terms of mileage, essentially, for someone who pace isn't the only part of his game by any means, but he is very, very quick. And how much might it affect him if he loses that pace, like we've seen with many strikers before who started playing regularly age 16, 17, Owen, Torres, Rooney, players like that. You know, the players generally do have a fairly set peak, and it's very rare that someone of this ilk would just keep playing to this extent for, you know, if he played for 15 years, that only gets him to 32. That's how much football he's already played. Leicester's an interesting shout, and we had a comment from Felix to say that in their data set, of that age group, they can only find, I think it's 3 players who have played a comparable amount of minutes, and that is Donnarumma, and that is Yuri Tielemans and Donny van der Beek. So it's pretty impressive territory, especially given the amount of loans that he had as well. As you say, he's an interesting prospect in 5 yards terms. He's 15 million on there, and you know, it kind of goes back to what I was saying there. How many years do you think he has in him at the top level, and do you think he's good enough to score goals in the Premier League? If the answer is quite a few years, maybe 4 or more, and yes, I think he will score goals, then that price has to be pretty interesting. You know, if you look on 5 yards at the moment at strikers in the Premier League, you know, the likes of Vardy and Bamford, Watkins, they do get quite a lot of performance pay. They're all between 3 and 4.5 million in this season alone. So at 15 million, you know, 3 good goal scoring seasons in the Premier League should see him get past that. But, you know, we've had Andy Watson, who is a massive Blackburn Rovers fan and is one of our scouts who set the prices for players. So I think it's hard to probably beat his opinion on Adam Armstrong. So it'll be hard to beat 5 yards on this one. But he was at pains to point out just now, as you guys were questioning the shot locations, he was at pains to point out that Armstrong's XG per shot numbers are pretty good. You know, it doesn't, although he does take a lot of shots and a lot of shots from outside the box, he's not just doing that. He does get on the end of some pretty good areas as well. 0.11 XG per shot, says Andy.
I mean, that's but that's where he's developed this season, is that he is now a player who can play that kind of fox in the box role as well. And I think that's what makes him such an exciting prospect. If you give him to, you know, an elite level manager, I think they're going to see so many different aspects to his game that can make him a danger in the final third. And Ali, you know, talking about XG, let's focus on what actually does happen, eh?
Clever. Well, that's the big question
to the discourse.
How much more development does this player have when he's already played the same amount of minutes as most 27, 28-year-olds who you probably wouldn't be saying the same things about with regards to, you know, he could improve way more. I think it's a really interesting one. We got a little bit longer on the stream. What I'd love is for I'm sending out the call for any last requests, any questions to Joe about the Scouted Football Handbook. Particularly, I think it'd be interesting now that we've got him. Get involved in the comments section. George and I are going to kind of put our hand to a bit of Scouted Football chat, because we've been looking at the handbook and we are not going to pretend like we know these players as well as you do. But George, there are 25 players profiled, and I just love how diverse a group they are from all over the world of football, not just European 5 leagues. And we've basically picked one each that we didn't know much about before reading the handbook, that now we feel we know a bit more about and we're quite intrigued about. And you were quite taken by the cover star himself, Gianluca Scamacca.
Yeah, from one cover star to another. This was written by Stephen Ganavas, of course, who you mentioned, the head honcho at Scouted Football. And it's a really interesting piece. And I didn't know much about him at all. On 5 yards, he's up at 27 million, currently playing his football for Genoa on loan from Sassuolo. And, you know, as soon as you start talking about a 6'5" Italian striker who's banging in goals for the unders, you've got my attention pretty quickly. And interesting just to note, I mean, there are quite often, it's quite rare, I would say, that you're going to have a guy up on 5 yards for 27 million quid. Firstly, he's playing for Sassuolo, not a team would necessarily associate. I mean, for all of the Lord of the Waves.
For Genoa.
No, he's on loan from Sassuolo.
Oh, sorry.
So he's at Sassuolo on loan at Genoa. So not only is he playing for not yet an elite level side, but he's also out on loan from an elite level side. He's 22 years old, so he's not young, as you'd say. He's not even scoring many goals. He scored 2 for Genoa this season in Serie A, and that is why this piece from Stephen is so good, is because it kind of tells you a little bit about why he is still rated so highly. And it's a combination of the improvement that we are seeing in his game due to the fact that he's not playing for an elite level team, meaning he's having to improve parts of his game, such as his hold up ability being crucial to that. Also the need to improve his finishing, where actually he's getting into the positions to score a lot of goals but isn't putting them away, hence the two goals so far this season. He was linked to Juventus in January, so anybody thinking of getting involved is probably fairly safe in thinking he is going to get that step up. But it does seem to me a hell of a reach if you're going to be getting involved now with a player at 27 million who Sassuolo have sent out on loan for their development, and who knows where he's going to be next season. Feasibly, he could be out on loan again. He could be playing at Sassuolo, or he could be playing second fiddle to Alvaro Morata at Juventus. We have absolutely no idea. Football Ollie says Sassuolo aren't far off becoming a top Italian side. I do get that. I'm not in any way questioning, what, especially their development over the last couple of years and the way that they play. I'm more thinking that if you're going to invest in a player at 27 million, you probably want them to be making a move away from Sassuolo and not looking to break into the team in the near future.
Andy says, I think his development hasn't got that much further to go, but if he plays in a better side, he definitely earns a lot more performance pay. That's for sure. Just in terms of Scouted and the handbook, Joe, how do you choose out of the 25 who ends up on the cover? I mean, the artwork is unbelievable, as it always has been, but better than ever this year. And you can't get past the fact that this is a very handsome Italian man. Is that the criteria?
Well, there's a famous saying about something that sells, but Gianluca Scamacca, he's a very aesthetic man, isn't he? But I think it's just, there's the intrigue as well around this player, and obviously the Italian Renaissance style is very nice to look at, with this sort of the cracked columns that are on there, which we kind of went for a bit of an artistic style. We had quite a few mock-ups that Kevin McGivern, who's the artist who drew that fantastic front cover. We had quite a few mock-ups done, and there was one of him sort of playing an old-timey sort of Italian instrument, a lyre, I think it's called, with sort of a Renaissance hat on, and that was my pick for the front cover. But I got outvoted. But it's Scamacca. He's not short of confidence. I think one of the reasons why a 2-goal striker who is perhaps, maybe not getting a huge seed of minutes at Genoa this season, is on the front cover, is because a lot of the time we watch these players at under youth international tournaments. So, for example, Scamacca was at the Under-20 World Cup with Italy, where they went quite far. I think they got to the semis. And there was a game where they played Ukraine, and I think it was in extra time. And he scores this absolutely barnstorming overhead kick, and it gets ruled out for offside. And I think it was the right call. I can't remember if VAR was in it or not, but I think it was the right call. And it was just one of those moments where you thought, he's got something. That would have been his Haaland hat-trick of hat-tricks against Honduras moment. But a lot of the time with these players, we see them sort of do very well at these youth international tournaments, and then they come back to their clubs and they're maybe third or fourth or fifth in the pecking order. So it takes them a little bit of time to develop. It takes them a little bit of time to earn those minutes, and I think that'll be the case with Scamacca. He's definitely someone who will be a starting striker. He's only 22. We were talking about Adam Armstrong there. He's probably Scamacca's probably the flip side to that. He hasn't played a great deal of senior football. He's been carted around quite a bit on different loans and various moves. But in terms of building blocks, if you were going to put all of those performances, all of those substitute appearances together into 90 minutes, you'd be looking at a really complete forward, which at 6'5" is an added bonus, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really interesting to have him on the cover. He's not the one that caught my eye, though. I don't think I'm the only person that reads these and puts a little fold in the corner of pages for certain players that I want to dig a little deeper into. And in this case, it was Malmo's Arnel Ahmedhodzic, a big name, big player. This guy caught my eye for a few reasons. Firstly, the profile, I should say, was brilliantly written by Lou Davis. No surprise there. Heavily involved with Scouted and just a brilliant writer. And I really enjoy reading his profiles. But, I said earlier that you guys are you don't get carried away too much. And it's easy to pick if you do. Like if your handbook was just full of this guy's going right to the top, then it would lose a lot of its appeal, I think, because it's it's kind of cheerleading, and I guess it loses a little bit of authority. But with Ahmedhodzic, he is one that Lou can't help but get quite excited about. The forecast for the future talks about how Scandinavian prospects usually move to a mid-level league before reaching the elite competition, but the Bosnian's good enough to skip that entirely. Now that's pretty exciting for me in 5 yards terms, especially given that he's on 5 yards at 13 million. I should say he's a centre-back, so this isn't someone that's going to rack up performance pay in terms of goals and assists. He's obviously playing at the moment in the Swedish league, which is not a performance pay league, so it's as with all of these, to an extent, this is more of a long-term question mark for me. But certainly for someone that I didn't know almost anything about before, this profile was pretty good. Lou mentions that for little more than £10 million, you'd be getting an exceptional defensive talent with a hugely valuable skill set. 6'4", he's quick. He excels in possession, as Lou writes, and that ticks a lot of boxes for me. So Lou mentions, Atalanta, Mönchengladbach, Lille, Brighton, Sevilla, Southampton. That seems like the level of club that might be the ones who think, this is a classic case of picking up a player who has developed hugely, who has an unbelievable skill set, and who we think after maybe 2 years or 18 months with us, we could flip to one of the very biggest clubs for, who knows, 70, 80 million pounds at the moment. So really interesting player. And I'm not sure if there are any Nottingham Forest fans watching or listening, but they'll be nodding along. Many people who are listening won't know that Ahmedhodzic signed for Nottingham Forest age 16. And that was in 2016. At the time, there was apparently a clear pathway to the first team. But as we know, when you're a club that is run in a way that sees managers get sacked every 9 months or so, it's very difficult for anyone to really put the development of a young player, not least a centre-back, at the forefront of their list of priorities. And so off he went after a couple of years without having had much of a chance. And now, only 21 years old, thriving at Malmo, playing European football, and potentially looking at a very, very big move coming up next. So the most exciting thing for me about having done this week of Scouted Football and 5 Yards partnerships is that it's not just about the content that we've done and the giveaway that we're running, where you can win a free Scouted Handbook number 9 if you are the best 10-word Scout report reply to the 5 Yards tweet, which you can find on the 5 Yards Twitter account. But it's actually that every single one of these 25 players who are in Handbook 9 are going to be on 5 Yards by Friday. And that means if you've got the handbook and you're reading about these players and doing what me and George do and go straight to YouTube, straight to Scout and try and get a visual on the suspect, so to speak, then you can write your own scout reports of these players as well. And of course, if you want to play the game as well, if you want to put in your own money and buy and sell players and try and make money through your own scouting eye, I guess, and the way that you see players developing and trying to get in front of a future star, then you can do that with all 25 scouted profiles in the current handbook. So thank you so much for joining our live stream. Joe, what a great sport. And we've really put you through your paces, but you've stood up to it. And thanks so much for talking us through it all.
No, thank you guys for having me on. It's a real pleasure to just chat football, and especially times like this, it's always good to connect, even if it is over the airwaves. But no, it's been a pleasure, and thank you to anybody who's tuned in to watch me drone on about Anthony's, Armstrongs, Amin Hodzić's, and and the like. All these players in far off destinations like Blackburn and stuff like that. So it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on.
George, we do this every week, don't we? Tell me about 5x5.
Yeah, 5x5 every single. Well, I mean, we record it on Wednesdays, goes out later in the week, where you and I chat about all things 5 Yards, all the latest players going up for the Friday transfer window, all of the interesting action that we see going on in the window as well, and a couple of players that we want to pull out. And we get some pretty good guests on as well, including a certain Joe from Scouted Football, who was on a couple of weeks ago. We've had a couple of great ones on too, and some more interesting ones in the offing as well. So do subscribe to it on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and also subscribe to it on all podcast platforms.
Massive shout out to anyone who's joined us from minute 1 to minute 51. You've been brilliant. Thanks for all your comments as well. And we'll see you in San Sebastian at some point in the future.